This is the word we use for describing nouns that can be either one or many. Hello, I'm Melena, and I am on a quest to uncover all of the grammatical mysteries that English learners and native speakers alike often find puzzling. And one of those mysteries pertains to nouns, or as they're known in the grammar world, the building blocks of language. It means they're pretty important. And of course, as a certified English teacher and language enthusiast, I've done my fair bit of noun wrangling, right? Just off the top of my head, I've taught students from all over the world, you know. And I think from that I've encountered quite a few tricky noun situations, so I know what I'm talking about. But when it comes to nouns, whether you're just looking for a quick grammar fix or something more in-depth, it is worth learning that nouns in English aren't necessarily as straightforward as they might seem. And so, without further ado, let's metaphorically open our grammar books as I uncover the fascinating world of singular and plural nouns. You know, when I was out there for the first time in the classroom, living the teacher lifestyle on my first day, the first confusing thing that I noticed is that students, and as it turns out, even some native speakers, insist upon using singular and plural nouns interchangeably. Melena, what do you mean by that? Well, here's how nouns work in English. We'll get into more details later. In English, the basic form of a noun is singular, which refers to one person, place, thing, or idea. When you want to talk about more than one, you use the plural form. Nobody would ever mix these up intentionally, or would they? Well, it turns out, it's not always as simple as adding an S to the end of a word. In English, I don't know why my hand is still up there. In English, it's a little bit different, because that same noun can take on different forms, depending on whether it's singular or plural. So the word cat becomes cats, dog becomes dogs, and book becomes books. And this is where those singular and plural differences really take shape. Or should I say forms? Because there's one key rule. On the whole, English nouns tend to follow patterns when forming plurals, but there are always exceptions. And the reason for this, as we all know, is that English loves to borrow words from other languages. But it's also because English has evolved over time, and so we just sort of cram things in fact, awkwardly. A tricky plural noun was where I first met my linguistic nemesis, and it was a word about the size of this studio, which surprisingly, given that I am often dubbed America's finest grammar enthusiast, is not that big. And at the best of times, I don't like being in close proximity to irregular nouns. For being squashed in a classroom with the word children was the second most horrifying experience of my life. And I know what you're thinking. Ooh, Sarah, what was the first? Being squashed in the elevator with the word mice on the way up. But the next time we met an irregular plural noun, we sure did have a chuckle. At least I think we did. I couldn't hear them because they were on the other side of the room. You see, English nouns like rules or exceptions, or English itself, are just complicated. I mean, they'd have to be, right? Especially given what we've discovered on this channel about the differences in noun forms. And of course, a noun is not the only place in a sentence where you'd find complexity. In addition to the noun, the verb, and in desperate times, the adjective, which should prompt nobody to ask me about the adverb incident of 1998. There is also the article. And I know what you're thinking. Yes, Sarah, the English article has separate forms for definite and indefinite. Well, firstly, that's not always true. And secondly, that's not where I was going with this. I was actually going to mention the noun-article agreement, because while in English, the article that works for both singular and plural nouns, this is often not the case with a or an. To go from singular to plural, you often have to kind of drop the a or an, because these articles are only used with singular, countable nouns. There's one thing to remember this: using a or an with singular nouns, but using no article or the with plural nouns, it could lead to an unintentionally hilarious grammar mistake. In fact, I do have footage, but I can't show it on here because I get hundreds of complaints and an equal number of teaching job offers, so just take my word for it. Plural forms are of course found in many places and through much of our daily lives, but never more do I need them than when I'm teaching English. So because of this, it is worth remembering some of the key differences between regular and irregular plural nouns. Don't take my word for it. Instead, listen to me from last year. It was once said by me in just a second from now that you can tell a lot about a language by the complexity of its plural forms. And given its unparalleled record of boasting more exceptions than everyone else, English might fancy its chances of winning the my-plurals-are-more-confusing-than-your-plurals debate. But the truth is, and you might find this shocking, English plurals are actually quite systematic. You can't talk about plural nouns without talking about suffixes. Suffixes are the letters added to the end of a word to change its meaning or form. And the only reason I made a suffix sim there was to draw your attention to the miniature word tree I made from regular and irregular plural nouns while I was bored. Anyway, there are several key differences in this department. On regular nouns, the plural suffix is usually s or es. This makes them easier to remember and use. How do I know that? Because I was a beginner English learner once. But whereas regular nouns, that is, nouns that follow the standard rules, are decidedly predictable, that's not always the case in English. Sure, words like book and pen definitely do have regular plural forms, but words like child and mouse, which are easily the more outgoing and competitive of the two, are irregular due to the manner in which English has evolved over time. There's also a difference in how they change from singular to plural. In regular nouns, the change is usually at the end of the word, thus making it easier to spot. And the internal change of irregular nouns means that you can do this in theory, but it's not recommended without memorization. One of the biggest concerns for English learners, aside from being forced to eat phrasal verbs for breakfast, is the great singular-plural divide. In English, singular nouns are categorized as one, while plurals are generally more than one. Moreover, English count nouns operate on a binary system of singular and plural. What does all of this mean? Well, let us just say that you want to use an English noun in a sentence, but it doesn't follow the regular rules, is not a count noun, or is incompatible with standard plural formation. In that instance, you'll need to run to the dictionary to pick up some irregular noun forms. A dictionary will show you the correct plural form of the noun. In the event that your dictionary doesn't come with pronunciation guides, be sure to also pick up one of these. This pronunciation guide is magic. It allows you to turn your singular noun into a plural noun without sounding like you re-speaking a different language. For advanced learners, the same applies, but in reverse. A good grammar guide might also be needed to safely use nouns in sentences. Both are widely available for learners and teachers on Amazon. I'd say the most obvious difference between singular and plural nouns is the quantity. When I first started teaching English, I couldn't believe how cool it was to explain this concept, and not in a Morgan Freeman type way. I mean, this was a fundamental grammar point. I just mean it was essential. But in some languages, you don't usually have that problem and/or luxury, because a significant amount of languages don't distinguish between singular and plural forms in the same way English does. This is a particular problem when you re-squished in a classroom with eager learners from various linguistic backgrounds. As with many areas of life, nouns are their own subgenre of English grammar word differences. Take, for instance, the name that we assign to that helpful part of speech that describes a person, place, thing, or idea. In English and much of the rest of the world, this word is known as a noun. This is the word we use for what grammarians might call a substantive or a naming word. Also, whether it's situated in the subject or the object position, English speakers also can't agree on what you call that area of the sentence that contains the main idea. In English, we usually opt for the word subject, Please note that learners, just like patrons on my most recent secret stream, are divided on whether this should be pronounced subject or subject. Either way, grammarians will often call this area the topic. More often than not, English speakers will call a plural noun a plural. Americans will call a plural, while British English speakers have about 100 words for a sofa. Chief among these are settee, couch, Davenport, Chesterfield or divan, and finally, collective nouns. This is something I've encountered far more in British English than I have in American English. This is a noun that refers to a group of individuals in which you use a singular verb for a group acting as a unit. But the use of collective nouns might be confusing to some learners. You might think of a collective noun, often pronounced as a singular noun, as a plural concept. A fine example of which is the word team from sports terminology that I somehow keep mentioning in my videos just by coincidence. That's it for this video. Thank you to my patrons for literally making this video happen. .com/grammar_enthusiast